How do you begin to tell a story about yourself and your experiences during a war? Where do you start when you know that there is no possible way to explain to someone what you have been through, knowing they will have no idea what you're talking about or how it makes you feel to even think about it? This has been a question I have asked myself numerous times, and yet I still have no answers. Do I feel an obligation to share my memories and experiences that have plagued my mind since I returned home from the Gulf War? Maybe I do have an obligation, so that others might learn from my experiences. Or maybe it's nobody's business but my own. So, how do I begin to tell a story that has no appeal to your average person in the first place? How do you begin to compare and contrast one war to another war? I don't even think I would even begin to try. When I think about my time in the Army as a U.S. Airborne Special Forces soldier, I have a difficult time believing anyone else other than those that I served with really cares, and why should they when that war is now a piece of history? When I start thinking about how I would begin to tell my story, I inevitably end up asking more questions of myself than I truly have the answers for. Maybe that's the reason for the difficulty with me telling about my experiences in the first place. I could begin with once upon a time, but I wouldn't be telling a fairy tale, even if at times it might seem like one to those who are not there. Could it be then the foundation for understanding an individual's experience during war? The prerequisite of understanding can only be forthcoming if you had been a participant of the war in question. This doesn't seem right, but then again, I know in my mind I could never explain to anyone the horrors of war, nor the lasting effects it has on those who fought them, if in fact they had not been there. Maybe I could begin to tell my story by explaining the political ideology behind the war, and then rationalize my involvement and actions as a soldier. But as a soldier, I knew it wasn't me who made these decisions, so how could I rationalize my involvement when I volunteered to serve my country in the first place? I can hear the old saying in my mind even as I write, or even tell you this. You knew the job was dangerous when you took it. Truly, I don't believe anyone really knows how dangerous the job really is when they take it. But that has always been the way of military life. By the time you do grasp the reality of the situation, it's too late to reconsider the exact reason or reasons why you're where you're at and doing what you're doing until after the fact, and by then it may be too late. But you're not really concerned about the circumstances at that given moment in time. You just want to get through the day alive and in one piece and to help your buddies do the same thing. Although at some point the question does arise, why is someone trying to kill me? Did I kill their dog or something? When and where one asks questions is not really that important. Coming to the realization, really, that someone wants to kill you is enough enlightenment for the time being, and time is not relevant. As the enemy takes no issue with this notion, sooner is usually better than later, and simply means one less infidel to them. One very real issue that did exist during the storm, when compared to other wars, was the fact that there existed a front, middle, and rear of the battlefield. This could explain why some troops saw little or no combat, although I have pondered the ability of how one receives a Bronze Star without stepping foot on the battlefield. Instead brings coffee to an armchair general who is sitting 4 stories underground in a filtered and air-conditioned building running the war. That would not represent my story. There also exists the notion that the length of a war is how we distinguish combat veterans from non-combat veterans, thus qualifying the validity of the veteran status. This, of course, is utter nonsense, but I am still surprised that this kind of thinking exists. If you arrive on the battlefield and it's your first day in country, and on that same day you have your legs blown off, are you any less of a combat vet? Or is it the fact that an appendage is now missing that qualifies one to be a real disabled combat vet? This is the mentality I have observed after I returned home from the Gulf War, reinforced with bumper stickers that says, "I'm no desert hero, just a Vietnam veteran." While these observations are probable story material, I still don't know if I could tell my story. You know, I could begin to tell my story by talking about the sick, dying, and dead veterans of the First Gulf War. But I have been told it's all in our head, and if anything is wrong with the veteran of that war, that's placed the blame on PTSD, because researchers, like one, wrote in a book, Gassed in the Gulf, had it all wrong and then lied to Congress. It's all really just a big conspiracy. After all, we know the government has never lied to our veterans, and the American public, and never would, have sold chemical or biological technology to Iraq. Well, this won't work for my story either, because I don't want to write a fictional story. I want to tell the truth about my experiences as a Gulf War vet. So here I am back where I started. How do I begin to tell my story? I think the sick Gulf War vets are telling my story, even if nobody believes them. It don't matter. And by those who fought the Iraqi army prior to the official ground war beginning. Sure, I know a lot of Iraqis waved white flags and defected. Hell, I saw it on the TV too when I came home. But mostly, my story is being told by fellow Gulf War veterans, by preferring to say nothing, because it's just easier to maintain anonymity. Maybe no one has ever thought about telling a story by saying anything at all. I suppose that's something to think about. When I'm asked about my service in the First Gulf War, I respond in the affirmative to the question. I was in the Army and was an airborne Special Forces soldier. Yes, I fought the enemy and they fought back, and yes, I knew and witnessed soldiers killed on both sides. But if given the choice, I too prefer my anonymity, because in the end I did my job, and it's just easier to avoid questions I don't want to answer. I have learned some very important lessons since I returned home. The first thing is that nothing is the same. The second, no one has any idea what you're talking about or how you feel. And probably the worst thing for me as a vet who has all of his appendages and that no one really cares. I wouldn't begin to speak for all Gulf War veterans, only myself when I say, it's just easier to keep some things to myself. So I guess that's my story. No explosions, no body count, no heroics. Although I could share many, many of these details. In the end, it's all about just having survived.